Let's say that the city of Charlottesville has decided to build a new elementary school, and they have designated the school board to be in charge of the entire project. So an architect has been hired, plans have been approved, sites cleared, foundation is going in, steel is starting to go up, and things are moving right along. Then one day, a city building inspector comes by and notices that one of the corner piers has sunk into our normally impenetrable red clay about 3 inches. This is clearly a foundational flaw. So the building inspector reports back to the school board, and the board now has a decision to make. One, do you just hope everything's going to be okay and keep building? Or two, do you stop, examine the flaw, repair what needs to be repaired, and then continue so that you don't endanger the lives and health of the children and personnel who will ultimately be able to inhabit that building? I am confident that the board's decision would be to stop, examine the flaw, and make necessary repairs before proceeding. I have found that there is a foundational flaw just like that in the school's naming/renaming process. I'll say right here that I do understand the impulse and the need in a lot of cases for organizations within cities and municipalities and states and regions to reflect current values onto structures and roadways and things along those lines to make sure that the values are in compliance with current thinking. I do feel very strongly, though, that there is a foundational flaw in that current naming process, and I'm here to shine a light on it. My name is Chuck Moran, and you would be right in assuming that with a last name like that I might have something to say about the Burnley-Moran renaming possibility. Sarepta Moran, the first principal at Venable Elementary and the educator for whom Burnley-Moran was named, was my great aunt. I'm a native of the city of Charlottesville. I attended Venable Elementary. I went to Lane High School and the University of Virginia. I have called Charlottesville home, as have my ancestors on both sides of my family, in the Moran side going way back into the 1700s. I was among the children who went to basement school when the Commonwealth of Virginia decided to obstruct federal law and shut down the schools following the Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954. My sister, Ginger Moran, has done a remarkable job of revealing who our great aunt, Sarepta Moran, was. So I'm not going to go back over that material. And if you have not read her treatise, I certainly encourage you to do so. And please let me know if you need a copy of it. Ginger and I spent many, many hours at Montebello learning from and playing around Aunt Seppi. In fact, Ginger is now grown up to be a writer, and her very first novel was entitled Sammy the Squirrel. It was a construction paper project that Aunt Seppi oversaw when Ginger was 6. Ginger is a PhD-wielding former faculty member of Fisk University, of course, an historically Black institution of higher learning, and Ginger is currently teaching upper English at Sidwell Friends in Washington, D.C. Aunt Seppi was an educator's educator. She studied at the Sorbonne in Paris. She did graduate work at Columbia, at Harvard, and at the University of Virginia. As noted in some of the material presented by the naming committee, the 1924 Midway High School yearbook was dedicated to Aunt Seppi's high ideals, true sense of justice, refined culture, and her sincere devotion to her work. In her official capacity as the principal at Venable Elementary, Aunt Seppi hired my father and her nephew, Chick Moran, to go out and get some musical instruments for the kids. My dad came back with about 30 harmonicas, and as far as I'm concerned, that was the beginning of the fabled and wonderfully notorious musical program here in the Charlottesville City schools. Following in Aunt Seppi's footsteps, my father became a teacher and eventually became principal at Blue Ridge School. He and my mother were civil rights activists here in Charlottesville. My dad picketed segregated establishments and actually challenged his boss, President Colgate Darden at the University of Virginia, over segregation. He was the chairman of the Save Our Schools Committee in the mid-50s. He co-founded the Quaker Meeting here in Charlottesville. And in 1962, he took my sister and myself and my mom down to Lynchburg to hear Dr. Martin Luther King when he came through Virginia on a voter drive. I was very fortunate as a sixth grader in Venable to be able to meet Dr. King, and at that time I joined his Freedom Army. These days I have my own online learning community, and I have experience teaching social media marketing, so I too am a teacher. The gene has flowed past me on down to my daughter, who teaches elementary music in the county schools. I'm telling you all of this because my family, going back to Great Aunt Seppi, is one of teachers who highly respect the value of education. And I, for one, don't want to see the name of Burnley-Moran changed, permanently erased, without taking the time to truly see if that erasure is in alignment with our community's current values. So back to that foundational flaw that I believe others have seen in the naming/renaming process. Here is where that corner pier of our fictional elementary school has sunk 3 inches into the clay. Perception is reality. This is one of the documents that the naming committee has presented to the community. And it's a bio that was written in 2019 about my great Aunt Seppi. And to a large extent, it seems very factual and straightforward. The problem occurs here in this component that I have highlighted. Moran was active in the Albemarle chapters of both the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR, and the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the UDC. The UDC was one of the most effective organizations at propagating the lost cause myth, which sought to present an ahistorical view that the Civil War was not about the economic interest of slavery and the political interest of white supremacy. The Albemarle chapter was instrumental in erecting several Confederate monuments in downtown Charlottesville, including the statue at the Ready at the Albemarle County Courthouse, the Robert Edward Lee equestrian statue, and the Thomas Jonathan Jackson or Stonewall Jackson statue. One of the most notorious tactics of promoting the lost cause revision of factual history was through the writing and selection of school textbooks. First as a teacher and later as principal, Moran held a uniquely effective role in this historical activism. Here's my problem with the perception that that document presents. I don't see any proof of my Aunt Seppi's level of activism. What votes did she take when she was a member of the organization? Did she actively try to raise funds to build those statues downtown? What other horrifying activities could she have done as a person who was doing something with textbooks according to that document? If there is proof, I'd love to see it. My inference is clear here, that I believe that we are erasing these names of Burnley and Moran based on assumptions that were presented in this and other documents, unwittingly perhaps, by the naming committee. And I would, for one, hate to see that erasure is complete, because what it does is devalue the incredible contribution that these women made. Don't forget that they were honored as principals. All of the principals that are in the city schools these days are standing on their shoulders, as my friend Ray Smith says about his great-great-aunt, Carrie Burnley. So are we going to diminish all of that value, all that they brought to education, all that they brought to raising children, to influencing people, including members of my own family, to become teachers like my dad, myself, my sister, and my daughter? And we're going to just say that we know so much about their conduct back in those days that we are going to completely erase all the value that they brought to the city schools and just go scrub the names off the front of those schools and come up with something new. I hope not. I sincerely hope not. That's the foundational flaw that I see in the way that this was conducted. And I certainly hope that the school board will take another look at the naming of Burnley-Moran School based on the evidence that has been presented by my sister and by Ray Smith, the great-great-nephew of Carrie Burnley. I don't for a minute blame people on the outside in our community who have been here for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, much shorter period of time than I have been, and who don't know anything about my great Aunt Seppi, never even thought about what the name on the building meant, and who took part in this survey and these other documents and realized that there was something that was abhorrent about their earlier activities and have come to conclusions based on those presentations. The survey that I cannot get into right now, the form is closed, actually has some additional biases in it. And I would strongly encourage the powers that be to take a look back at the original form, at some of the inferences that were created there. One of them was about how Carrie Burnley had the unmitigated gall to take her children to place flowers at the bases of the statues during her time as the principal at McGuffey. That's shocking that she would do something like that. No, it's not. It's what people did in those days. And here too, I just don't understand the impulse to devalue all of the positive contributions that these women made to this community in favor of this very narrow view of what they did as legitimate daughters of the Confederacy without a single shred of proof of their level of activity in that organization. Thank you for listening.